give you by way of introduction here real quick. Okay. And so, yeah, let's do this real quick. I apologize, I had the microphone off. Yeah, I wanted to hop on just to be able to say that, you know what, I did contribute today. So I really want to get into what it is that that we want to talk about. I want to talk about the Waw-Consecutive in Isaiah 53 and verse 2. Isaiah 53 and verse 2. We're going to talk about it right now because it really is serious stuff. It's serious stuff. It's wonderful. So what we're going to do is we're going to go there right now, and let me make just a couple of changes. And I tell you what, let's dig in. How about that? Let's dig in. Well, taking a look at what we have here, we're talking about the Waw-Consecutive in Isaiah 53. Now, if you don't know what the Waw-Consecutive is, we're going to talk about the Waw-Consecutive. We're going to talk about that, okay? What I want you to see here is that when we, and in fact, let me just give you just a little bit of an explanation of what the Waw-Consecutive is right now. The Waw-Consecutive, it is a construction in Hebrew. It is a construction that is usually placed when the state of something is being described, right? It's a part of the narration, but it's usually designed to give you the blow by blow. Now, when they want you to see that it's kind of like blow by blow, and it's almost as if they want to inject causality in it, like these are the things that are happening, like these are all the dominoes that are in a row and one fell right after another, and this is what happens. When that is the case, when they're describing an event, when they're talking about a state of being and they're building up to the state of being in classical biblical Hebrew, you will find the Waw-Consecutive, okay? So it's important to know what's happening in the Waw-Consecutive. Now, I'm going to let the cat out the bag actually right now. Why? You know, I was going to say real soon, but no, I may as well do it right now. The thing about the Waw-Consecutive is that it looks like it may be imperfect or future tense, but it's really the past tense. Or it could look like the past tense and be the future tense, okay? And there's a way that you can determine which one it is. We're going to talk about it. Once you see it, then you're like, oh, okay, I know what that is and I know what's happening. So with that being the case, let's go into it, okay? And let's begin to talk about the Waw-Consecutive. Now, we're going to be looking at Isaiah. And there's something that you should note when it comes to Isaiah, that it is highly poetic. Okay? Isaiah is highly poetic. Now, as we know poems to exist, there's a lot of metaphor, there's a lot of things in there, so that you can't take what you're looking at literally. It's not like prose. Okay? You have to rightly divide the word of truth, and we have to also rightly divide what is poetry, what is prophecy, and also what is prose. Now, as you can see, here's a reminder that all poetic and prophetic scripture must be interpreted and not understood literally. Wait a minute. That's very important, because that says that what you're looking at in poetry and what you're looking at in prophecy is not to be taken literally, that you must interpret it, okay? One of the famous scriptures for interpretation we find in Daniel in the 7th chapter at about the 13th verse, where he's seeing the beast and he's seeing the dragon and he's seeing all these things, and long story short, a divine being, one of the sons of Elohim, has to come and interpret it for him. And interpretation is different than translation. It's different because when you interpret something, you're seeing something, but what you're seeing is not the end all be all. There's another message behind it, okay? And so, that being the case, it's important to understand that all poetic and prophetic scripture must be interpreted. Now, since Isaiah is one of the most poetic books in the Tanakh, it's important. It's very important that we understand what we got to do, right? So, let's take a look at Isaiah. And it starts out, believe it or not, in the 52nd chapter and the 13th verse. And it reads, "Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high." Now remember, we said poetic. We said that is poetic and that is prophetic must be, yes, it must be interpreted. So when you see here where it says, "My servant shall deal prudently," he, right? When you look at what's happening here, you have a singular, which is poetic. It is a poetic attribution for Israel itself, right? Because Israel, if you look at 48, 1 and 2, I'm sorry, 48, 1 and 2, if you look at 49, I believe it's verse number 1, there's all throughout Isaiah. And see, and again, you've got to let Isaiah be the expert on Isaiah. Let Isaiah tell you what it is that he's talking about, okay? If we were to, listen, if you could have a conversation with Isaiah and you're like, man, what were you really talking about in Isaiah 53? He'd be like, well, didn't you read 52 and 51 and 50? And I mean, did you read the whole thing? And yeah, because he will tell you what he's talking about, right? So we keep things in context, and understanding things in context, we can flow with what he's trying to tell us, okay? And here, this is poetry, and he wants us to know that there is someone that is serving him even as an individual, okay? And you look throughout Tanakh, and you'll find out that even in Tanakh, that it mentions that, in one of the prophecies, it says, "And you shall defeat them as a man. You shall defeat them even as a single man." And also it reads in the book of Joshua, and Joshua took the entire valley and won the war. It doesn't mean Joshua specifically. No, it means the group of everyone that is consistent of Israel, mainly the warriors, they fought, okay? And they're the ones that fought the battle. But you'll read, it says, no, and Joshua did this. It doesn't mean that he did it by himself, no. So this is prophetic language that gives you a single representation of a servant who is actually Israel itself. Okay, so let's move forward. So let's talk about here the Waw-Consecutive. And what may be cut off is, this comes from Gesenius's Hebrew grammar, and this is the imperfect Waw-Consecutive, okay? The imperfect with the Waw-Consecutive. I just want you to notice what it reads here. The imperfect, which is the future tense, with Waw-Consecutive, serves to express actions. Notice what it reads: actions, events, or states, which are to be regarded as the temporal or logical sequence of actions. Okay, remember the blow by blow, dominoes falling one right after another to bring about a result. A sequel of actions, events, or states mentioned immediately. It mentioned immediately before. The imperfect consecutive, notice what it reads here, the imperfect consecutive, which is what we would call the future tense, okay? The imperfect consecutive is used in this way most frequently as the narrative tense, corresponding, okay, it's going to tell you that it's corresponding to the Greek aorist or the Latin historic perfect. As a rule, the narrative is introduced by a perfect and then continued by means of imperfect Waw-Consecutive on this interchange of tenses. So, let me break it down to you, okay? It's going to look like it's talking about future tense, but it's really going to be talking about past tense. Okay? So in other words, the tenses are changed, they're switched. And you'll find out that this happens a lot, this happens all the time in the Tanakh, because again, it's laying out events, it's laying out sequences, things are happening, right? Our Elohim is moving, the people are moving, things are happening, enemies are trying to come into territories. So things are coming together in a way that, you need to understand event after event after event after event. And so the Waw-Consecutive, it is used a lot. It's used a whole bunch, okay? It is used a lot in Tanakh. So let's go back into it and let's now take a look at the Waw-Consecutive. Now, the Kal imperfect without the Waw-Consecutive is on the left, right? It is right over, it's way over there. Okay, the other side. See that? Other side, way over there. Yep, there it is. Okay, so if you notice here, you have Yishmor, right? You have Yishmor, which means he will observe. And you can tell that this is the future tense. You can tell that this is future, okay? Because it starts with the Yod, right? Hidek, you got the Sheen with the Shoah right there, right? Okay. And so you got the Holom without the Waw. And this is the future tense. This is the imperfect. He will observe, right? Now, I want you to notice, because now those of you who know Hebrew enough to understand that this is a vav, which is also prefixed to mean and, right? But when it's with this particular construction, it doesn't mean and he will serve. It doesn't mean and he will serve. It does not mean that. This actually means and he observed. And he observed. Wait a minute, how can that be? What do you mean? Okay, now let's take a look down here and you will see something, okay? This will make it very, very obvious. Okay, this is the future tense with the Waw-Consecutive, which means that because you have the Waw-Consecutive, it is past tense. Okay, so this would not be he will kill. This will be he killed. And I don't know why they, it bothers me when they use, like he killed. It's like, you know what? I mean, can't you use any other word? Can't you use any other, why you gotta, anyway. Why does it have to be about killing, right? But I want you to notice something here. I want you to notice that you have the Vav, right? Now, in an example that we're going to see, you have a Shoah right here. But notice, you don't have a Shoah right here, right? But you also have a doubling of the first predeterminer, which is right here is this Yod. In other words, it is the first syllable that you get to after the Wav. If there is a dot there, doubling it, and if you don't have a Shiva here, but you have the qamats here, then you'll understand, you know what? Hey. This is the Waw-Consecutive. And you'll notice it because you will have, listen, in a regular future tense, when you have the Vav, like if this were and he killed, we would get rid of the qamats here, we'd put a shiva right there, and we'd get rid of this dot, and then that would make this and he killed. Think about it this way. Think about the fact that you've got to spend time pronouncing this, but if it was a shiva, then you could do it quickly, right? You could do it very quickly. So this is what I like to say. With the shiva here, I imagine that you're just trying to hurry up and get back to the future. Trying to hurry up and get back to the future. But if you spend all this time here, then and this is just the way I make sense of it in my mind. If you spend all this time here with this vowel, this flat line, right, the qamats, then this is not the future. Now, If it looks like the future but it's not the future, then it is in the perfect tense. So this would be, and he killed. Okay, so now again, let's look up here. And if you notice, this is a long A vowel here, qamats, and then you have a doubling of the first predeterminer here with the vav, right? With the long A vowel, and then of course with the double on the first syllable. That lets you know that it is the Waw-Consecutive. Now let's see this in actual scripture. Notice in Isaiah 53 and 2, and I'm not even getting to this is the Waw-Consecutive imperfect. I haven't even touched upon the Waw-Consecutive perfect yet. Okay, which does the opposite and makes it future instead of the past. But let's read this. Isaiah 53 and 2. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness or beauty, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. Notice what it reads here, for it says, for he shall grow up, which would put it in the future tense. But if we take a look, let's take a look at Isaiah, and let's take a look at Isaiah 53 and 2, and let's do this. Let's go to the Hebrew. Let's actually take a look at some of the Hebrew. So Isaiah, let me go there, I had it. Let me see if it's still, okay. All right, so let's take a look, see here. Oh, you can't see what I'm doing. Give me a second here. Alrighty. All right, so now let's take a look at it in English. For notice what it reads. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. Sounds futuristic, doesn't it? Yes, it does. But when we go into the Hebrew and we look at Isaiah 53 and 2, what do we see here? Okay, we see here, we see the vav, we see, of course, the long A vowel, and then we see the first predeterminer here that is doubled. And so this is the Waw-Consecutive, okay? This is the Waw-Consecutive. Now, to prove it to you, I can click on it. You don't have to take my word for it. But if you notice here, okay, Waw-Consecutive imperfect. Well, Waw-Consecutive imperfect, which means then it is not in the future. It is in the past. Did you catch that? It is not in the future. It's in the past. So how then would we read this? Let's go back to the Hebrew, and then let's read this particular word here. Rather than it being in the future tense, we're going to read it according to what is written here, which is the Waw-Consecutive imperfect, which means that it is in the past tense and to be understood in the past tense. So rather than it saying, for he shall grow up, he grew up before him as a tender plant. He grew up before him as a tender plant and as a root out of dry ground. He has, as in right now, no form nor comeliness. And when we shall see him, wait a minute, is that really future tense, or is it the Waw-Consecutive imperfect, which would make it past tense? Let's take a look. Going back to the Hebrew, notice what it reads here. Okay. Right. Vaya'al, he grew up. Okay. And there is no, this is the part of the scripture that there's no form nor comeliness unto him. Okay, and there's, okay, here we go. Here we go. And Venidehu, and when we see him, and when we, and this is the nafal, so it's passive, and when we will have seen him, or when we had seen him, okay, there is not any there isn't any appearance. There isn't any. This is, I like to think of this, whenever you have the mem in front, it is active. It is actually supplying a continuation of energy, I like to think. Imagine when a machine is running, there's a hum to it, right? So this means that it's working, and the verb after it is to see. So this is an appearance, right? It is a seeing or an appearance, okay? And once again here, this says, and when we will see him. So now this is future tense. But wait a minute. How can this be the future tense? Okay, but this be in the past. See, this is more proof. Understand this, if you will. This is more proof that Israel is the servant. Because when Isaiah is writing before. Isaiah is writing hundreds of years before the sacking and the sieging of Jerusalem. And so he says, in Israel's beginning, he grew up before him as a tender plant. If you go back to Isaiah 5, and I'm not trying to spend a lot of time with this, but if you go back to Isaiah 5 and read in Isaiah 5, you'll discover that Israel was found in tenderness and was taken care of, right? As a tender plant. He says that you were like a baby that was unwashed, and you were still in your blood. He should grow up before him as a tender plant out of dry ground. He found him in the desert, right? He found Israel in the desert, and he spoke to Abram, and he made him to be the father of many nations. So the he and the him is the Israel. For he should grow up before him, Yahweh our Elohim, as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. Abraham was in the desert. Okay? And our Elohim found him and spoke to him, and he became a nation. The children of Israel wandered through the desert, right? They were fresh and young as a nation. So they are the ones that grew up before him as a root out of dry ground. Okay? He hath no form nor comeliness. He's not altogether, right? And when we shall see him, when he is fallen and when he is taken into enemy hands, when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him as a nation. No nation wants to be in exile. No nation wants to be besieged. No nation wants to have its people starving and hungry. No nation wants that, right? That is not the perfect picture of a nation. He is despised and rejected. Think about this for a second. Men are styled as nations in the Tanakh. He is despised and rejected of the nations. Okay? A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. How many times did Israel fall? How many times was Israel judged? How many times did Israel receive the word of the Lord that was not too pleasant? Okay? And we hid our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. These are all things in the past. We hid, not we will hide. We hid our faces from him. Okay? He was despised. We esteemed him not. In other words, we didn't even, listen, we hated being righteous. We decided to follow idols. We hated the portrait and the picture of what Israel was to be, and we chose to follow the other nations. We despised what we had, and we did not esteem the nation as we should have. All of this fits in this particular construct, right? Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. We did esteem him stricken and smitten of God. Now, part of this is also what the nations are saying, because remember I said that in Isaiah 52, it actually begins at 53. I want you to see something here. Behold, my servant shall deal prudently, right? He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. Now, that's what he's going to be, right? Talking about Israel, yes, Israel is going to be all these things, but it's not yet. And notice what it reads, as many as were astonished at you. And so we're reading part of that astonishment. And this is part of what the kings are saying. Notice what it reads here in verse number 15. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Actually, he shall cause many nations to spring up. It's like they're going to, and when you read this in the Hebrew, you get a different picture than what they're saying in the actual English, right? Let me do this real quick. I will just go there. Okay. Ken Yazeh Goyim, right? What's going to happen here, therefore, and this is a very interesting word here, because this is the Hifel, and the Hifel is causative, right? It's causative, which means, okay, therefore he is going to cause the nations, okay, and he's going to cause them, many of the nations, he's going to cause them to basically rise, like to get up. Okay, but they're going to get up, and the kings are going to be present, but they're going to shut their mouths. So in other words, the kings' mouths are going to be shut. They're going to stand up, but their mouths are going to be shut. Now notice what it reads as we continue here. So this is about astonishment. Verse number 15, they're astonished. Now notice what it reads as the chapter continues, because Isaiah 53:1 is not the beginning. Okay, it's just a continuation. And notice what it reads here, because this is talking about the astonishment. Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? Who in the world is going to believe us? Who in the world is going to believe this? Who is going to believe this? And so it's like not many people are going to believe this. The nations are not going to want to believe this, right? And so as we continue, we get into all of the narrative that is all surrounding the fact that this is Israel, and we know that it is Israel because, again, of what Isaiah tells us about the servant and who the servant is. There really is no mystery. He tells us who the servant is, and so with that being the case, he tells us who the servant is. He lets us know, and we see that the servant himself is someone that has suffered and is suffering. Okay? Someone that has suffered and is suffering. So, the kicker here is in Isaiah 53:2, where it says, in the Hebrew, for he grew up before him. Now, the reason why this is so amazing is because the church, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, actually did get their hands on the Tanakh during the reign of Antiochus IV. When Antiochus III ruled over Judea, he gave concessions to the temple priests. He gave concessions to Judah. And he said, you know what? Hey, I'm going to let you guys, listen, you won't go by my rules. I want a lunar calendar. You're not letting me do the lunar calendar. You're out. But I will let you take the library, right? And they go to Qumran, and the rest is kind of history. There is nothing in the Dead Sea Scrolls that even mention the Essenes, right? But you do see the Zadokian priesthood being highlighted and mentioned and favored all throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls. But that's a whole nother story. As we continue, looking at the deeds of Antiochus IV, he persecuted, and he is the one who committed many sins and atrocities against the temple. He forbade following the Tanakh. He forbade reading the Tanakh. He made it unlawful to circumcise and basically to keep the law, statutes, and commandments, right? We read from Maccabees, 1 Maccabees 3:48, that the Greeks were all the time wanting to get their paws on the Torah so that they could implant their images into the Torah. It's right there. They wanted their hands on our book, and they've been wanting their hands on our book all this time, right? So what they ended up doing is they ended up actually getting to the Tanakh and changing the Tanakh. But not only that, they also changed the Septuagint. Yes, they did. And not only did they change the Septuagint and the Tanakh, they also put interpolations in the writings of Josephus. That it just is what it is, right? It just is what it is. So that being the case, it's important that you take a look at the Hebrew and understand that there are things that are placed even in the Masoretic text. Basically, the Masoretic text was tampered with, okay? So, it's been a long day. I just wanted to shoot out this quick little lesson, if you will. But long story short, the Waw-Consecutive imperfect actually takes that which is the imperfect or the future tense, and it makes it past tense. So therefore, when we read in Isaiah 53:2, "For he shall grow up before him," it really reads in Hebrew, "For he grew up before him." And on that note, we have to say that because the individual, the servant, was already there, in fact, he preceded the days of Isaiah, it's plain to understand that this is, of course, the nation of Israel. This is the nation of Israel. Okay? So with that being spoken and with that being said, we have to look at it with fresh eyes and understand what is actually going on. Now, one of the last things that I want to do, I have just a couple of more slides. I don't really need to kind of go there with the slides, but you know what? Since I am, and since we are, I just have just a couple, right? I just have just a couple more slides. In fact, I've got one more slide. If you'll just let me do one more slide, then I will do that one more slide. How about that? So, let's skip on down to the last slide, okay? And let's see what it reads. I want you to notice this in verse number 18, because there's another place where, okay, see, because this is going to open up a whole bunch if I do this, but it reads in Isaiah 8:18. It reads these words, very simply. It says, "Hey, when you take a look at me, I and the children whom the Lord have given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth in Mount Zion." Okay? And the reason why this is important is simply because what he's saying is, you know what? When you read about, see, we're going to have to go there. We're going to have to go there. But when you read about the virgin with child, right? All right, fine. Okay, let's go there. See, because you guys, okay, I know you want to go there. I know you want to go there, so let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and do it. In fact, I'm just going to back all the way out of this. Let's go there. Isaiah. Since you guys want me to go there, let's go there. We're going to do Isaiah 7 and 14. And this, of course, is a very potent scripture, right? People love this because they use this as a proof text. Notice what it reads. Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold a virgin. I understand that the Septuagint says Parthenos. I understand that. However, that is what is in the Hebrew is Alma. Okay. Now, whether they were attempting to use Parthenos for Alma, and maybe back then in that day, maybe it was a direct alignment with Alma. But Alma is not a virgin. Alma is a young lady, a young maiden. Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall, or a young woman shall conceive and bear a son. Now notice what it says here. Behold, a virgin shall what? Shall conceive. This puts it in the future tense. Let's go into the Hebrew and let's see what's there. Okay. In the Hebrew here, verse number 14, right? Lakein, therefore. Okay. Yitain, he will give, the Lord, he to you. So in other words, the Lord will give unto you, ot, he will give unto you a sign. Hine, behold, ha'alma hara. Oh boy, wait a minute. Do you see this? Now, if you know anything about biblical Hebrew, you'll know that when you have the definite article in front of both of these, okay, the second becomes an adjective. So this is actually saying in Hebrew, the pregnant young woman. Because what it literally is saying is ha'alma, the young woman, the pregnant. So in Hebrew, the way that you would say this in English is you would say the pregnant woman. Okay? The pregnant woman, right? And notice what it reads here. V'yeled. V'yoledet. Okay? She's going to have a son. She is going to have a son. Okay? Now, notice what else it says here. Vekarat. And she will, listen, and I understand that the Septuagint reads something just a little bit different, right? But I want you to see this because I want you to see that I am not making anything up. So I want you to see this, right? This is the Waw-Consecutive. So in other words, this is just basically she's going to call his name Emmanuel. But this is already a pregnant woman. So this is not about her conceiving. She's already conceived and she's about to bring the baby out. Okay? And they've already picked out a name for it. The name is going to be Emmanuel. But here's what the sign is. Here's what the sign is. In fact, let me go back to English. Here is what the sign is here. The sign is not the young woman having a child. Women have babies every day. Okay? But the real sign is here. Verse number 16. For before the child should know to refuse evil and to choose good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings. And there you have it. That's the sign, right? And that's the sign. So then by the time you get down to Isaiah 8 and 18, and then you read what Isaiah says, he says here, you know what? Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given unto me, we're for signs. I'm going to highlight that. Behold, I am the children whom the Lord hath given me. So this was, listen, the child and the pregnant woman was Isaiah's wife and his son. This was not about a future pregnancy. This was not anything that was going to happen 742 years later, because that would have done the king no good. This is a sign that the king needed to console him and needed to know that our Elohim was going to come through for him and resolve this particular problem. This had nothing to do with the future, as far as a future king coming, right? So Isaiah says, behold, I and the children whom the Lord hath given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth in Mount Zion. So with that being stated, with that being said, I don't know if we could actually, I don't know if we need to say anymore, right? Because it's not about the future. It's about now. And so with that, I ask that if you're not worshiping and serving the only true Elohim, for behold, the Lord our God is one. Not a trinity, not three persons. He is one. Honor him and bless his name forevermore. He is Yah. Psalms 68 and 4. He is Yah. He is our Elohim, and he is one. Isaiah 43, 9 and 10. Behold, I am he, I am the Lord, and there is beside me there is none other. There is no other God. Okay. Isaiah 48 and 1. I mean, we could go on and on and on. Isaiah 44, 5 and 6. Isaiah 45 and 5. I alone stretched out the heavens with my hands. Repent and serve the only true Elohim, for there is none other. Peace and blessings to you. Shalom. We'll talk to you soon.